Today, I'm chatting with Amber Dunford. She's an interior designer and design psychology expert. Hi, Amber.
Hello. Good to see you.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. Thanks. So I'm excited to dive into your expertise, design psychology. So let's start there. Why don't you tell me a little bit about, just sort of give me an overview of design psychology.
What that is? Well, my background is psychology. I went to school for that. We'll get into that. But so it's sort of a merge of psychology and design, and really like digging a little bit deeper to find out not only like what do you want aesthetically from your space, but what is going to promote well-being for you. What do you emotionally, psychologically need from your space, and kind of tapping into some of those things on a deeper level. So it's kind of the overview of that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what might be some sort of like basics around that, sort of like the foundation that you start with?
Perfect. Yeah. So design psychology is attachment based. So it's really personal for every individual. And attachment based, when I was a therapist, that was my school of thought. And attachment, so our formative years for attachment are ages 0 to 3. And we not only attach to people in that time, and that kind of sets like the blueprint for how you then attach and form attachments moving forward, but we also attach to space in that time. And so we have these like ingrained preferences and aversions even that we maybe don't even realize. They're just sort of part of those early formative years. And also, as you grow up and as you are in different kinds of environments, you sort of have an inclination to like, I just feel best in these kind of spaces. And so we really kind of dig into those attachments and what kind of spaces are cohesive for your attachment style and you as an individual versus maybe just what's trending.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So is that something you find when you've worked with design clients that they specifically when they work with you, they're specifically seeking that information? Or is that something new that you bring to the relationship?
I sort of weave it in. There are people that really like want to go there, right? And for some, it's a little woo-woo, so not everyone wants to go there. But I do find that a lot of people, even just in conversation, I really rely on my former therapy skills to kind of dig a little deeper just inherently. That's just who I am as a person. But I do find that some people are very curious. There's things and different exercises you can do if that's something that you're interested in doing with a client. There's some like exercises where you kind of go through the timeline and you look at all your history of like meaningful spaces. And in the same way where I, as a therapist, would have formed like a treatment plan for a client, which is sort of your roadmap, I then would do like a design treatment plan that is like, okay, what do you need from a space emotionally? How does it need to function? But how do you really want to feel in this space? How do you want others to feel? So you sort of are making a treatment plan, and you can always refer back to that throughout the process. Like, are we getting there? Are we hitting the mark? And it's the same thing you would do in therapy, really, where you have goals, you have, different markers that you want to achieve throughout your time together between therapist and client. And it's very similar to like working design psychology into a design project. So it's looking at that history you have with space and kind of dumping it out and working with it. We all have like a connection to space, or we all feel a certain way when we're in a space, but we don't always link the reasons why. And in the same with therapy, it's just so important to externalize that. That's why talk therapy is so powerful, because you once you say it out loud and once you acknowledge a lot of it, then you can work with it. And then I can say like, I'm noticing that you are referring to this time in your life when you felt the most stable or most happy. And it was on these vacations that you took as a child, as a family in the woods. Do we need to maybe look at, what are some of those elements? What can we bring into the conversation and work with? Like, is it textures? Is it the smell of the woods? Is it the, deep earthy greens? So I think once you have all of that to play with, then you can really have a clear vision of what the design needs to be.
I can imagine as a client that would be really fun, and as a designer to sort of, especially with your background, to tap into that in a client.
I know I would love it if somebody walked me through that. So yeah, I hope it's meaningful and creates, all spaces are meaningful, but I think, bringing that out in a client can be really fun. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm curious. So backtracking a little bit here.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your background is in, you have a background in design, but also in psychology.
Yeah.
So how did those two worlds collide for you?
Yeah, let me go way back. So I went to school for interior design. And was it before or after that? I got I think a bachelor's in psychology. Had stumbled on to maybe an article even way back. And this is still, it's been around for a while, but not many people are doing it. And it's a lot more prevalent now. But at the time, it was just like an article I'd read about the connection between space and psychology. And I thought, oh, well, this is me. This feels amazing. I'd love to dig into this a little more. And I reached out to a couple people that I knew of were in the field. And they just said, you really need to go get some higher education. I went to interior design school after that. And then in Utah, where I was at the time, I was hand rendering, if that tells you how long ago this was. There wasn't any, CAD or anything or Revit. But I decided, I need to get higher education in one area or another. And so I went and got my master's degree in psychology. And I was a clinical psychotherapist for years. Really just kind of working with whoever walked through the door. So kids was my specialty, like trauma work with kids, couples counseling, drug treatment. I did a little bit of everything, but I always had this pull to get back into like that merging of the fields. And so while I was a practicing therapist, I actually pitched, I just wanted to go lecture at the college to the interior design and architects and like teach them about this. And the director of the program got back to me and said, do you want to teach a course on this actually instead of just coming and doing a lecture? And I was like, no, not at all. But I just wasn't a teacher, even though I don't know if I mentioned this, my archetype, my Myers-Briggs is literally the teacher, but so it's in there somewhere. But so I said yes, and I decided to develop a course, and I taught that for about 13 years on the subject. And now I just do private courses for groups mostly. I may go back to the college at some point, but kind of a long-winded answer how I got there. It's a winding road. Every time somebody asks me, like, how do you get into this field? I'm like, there is no roadmap I can give you. I just kind of fell into it. So,
yeah, that makes sense. But it seems like a natural fit, right? I always think of designers as therapists anyway. So it just makes sense. And then, we'll get into some of the concepts and things to consider when designing space. But it just, it aligns so well with psychology. And it just makes perfect sense. So, well, cool. Well, so, I would love to kind of get into some of your knowledge around designing specific spaces. So it might be fun to kind of go through some of the areas of design, maybe starting with residential. What are some of the key things to think about when designing a residence?
When I was a therapist and I was working with kiddos, I was doing a lot of art therapy, and I found it really important to do a color assessment. For some people, blue is sad, but for others, it's, calming or uplifting, and same with, reds or yellow. So I don't think it's safe to assume anything about color. Color is actually one of the most subjective elements of design out there. And it's the first thing we respond to when we look at an object is color. So I could show you something, in a certain shape, in a certain light, in a certain fabric, and the first thing your brain will assess is color. So color is really important to assess with the client and how they personally feel about it. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but people don't talk about color like, yeah, it's fine. Usually people are like, I hate that color. I love that color. We have very strong associations with color. And so I think it's important to start with a color assessment and talking about, what are these colors for you? What do you gravitate to? How do you feel around these colors? And so when I was a therapist, I would do this with kids. I would have like an emotion, like a happy face, a sad face. And I would say, okay, what should we color this face? And that gave me an indication of, okay, you associate blue with this, or you associate red with anger and, not love. So I think it's important to do some of those color assessments with people. Some people have very averse reactions to certain textures. Like for me, I love velvet. For some people, they're like, I touch it, I feel like I can't breathe, I can't be around it. So it's just, I think just knowing some of these things and just doing some baseline assessments is really important. And then I think from there, it's I always start with, how do you want the space to feel? That's so much more important to me than tell me, your favorite piece of furniture. We can get there, but I want to know, like, when you're in this space, what do you want it to feel like? And if it's multiple rooms, like, I love creating zones. Like, this is a zone where I need to be productive, I need to focus. And so that's a totally different treatment plan we're going to create for that space versus I want to host here. I want it to feel lively and energetic. And so I kind of like map out each section, like, how do you want this to feel? And are we working with two different zones in one space, right? Are you sharing this or it needs to be multifunctional? So I really want to know, how do you want the space to feel? And if it's a shared space, how do you want others to feel when they're in it?
Yeah. And I'm curious, you post, on LinkedIn a lot, and that's actually how we met. And one of the things that you post about is sort of like, things to consider. So you mentioned a post about something red in the house. And then there was another one about checker floors. Like, how do some things like that play into the design when you're thinking about how people want to use a space?
Well, humans love being led through a space. Like, we love sort of not being sure what's around a turn and being like excited by a space. I think when I was in retail, we would call that like surprise and delight, where we want to like get closer to it. We want to be like, we want to have our homes kind of feel that same way, where we want to meander through them. And so I think it's really important to create, for so long, we had these open floor plans, which I'm in one now. And I actually wish that our house was a little more closed off so that we could create different zones for, here's where we dine, and it's darker and moodier. And we like ceiling heights to change, and we like to be in different areas of the home based on our mood. So if I want to relax and read a book, humans in general, we're going to seek out a space with a lower ceiling and a little, dimmer lights and somewhere where we can kind of curl up. But if I'm feeling more social and I want to like get things done or feel a little more energized, I'm going to go to like the room with the tallest ceiling or the brighter lights, or maybe contrasting color palettes. So that's one that contrasting colors are one that are going to energize us versus monochromatic palette. We're going to feel more soothed around. So just kind of taking in some of those things. I think the checkerboard thing you're referring to is we tend to move faster over checkerboard flooring. Psychologically, we're like, oh, this is unstable. And so we tend to move quicker through it. So that's kind of a trick you can use in retail and in the home. And then the red is one that, I always say use strategically. It's not great for learning environments. We tend to have a decrease in cognitive performance when we're around the color red, but we do act a bit more impulsively and we are more energized. And so it's great for retail, actually, as I'm sure we all know.
Is that why red? Because it does sort of energize you. So maybe that's why it's not great for learning.
Yeah, I wish I could remember the actual like data that's tied to that, but even just a flash of red during like test taking can prove like negative effects. We do rate people as more attractive and younger when they are wearing a bit of red. So there are some, positives to that. But when it comes to like learning environments, that's a color you do want to avoid, even if it's like just a red pen or something. You want to not introduce any red.
Interesting. I wonder if that's because it signifies like stop is kind of like
I think you're reminding me. Yeah, like go back, danger. Yeah. Or I think there's probably some long history of just like marking up papers with red. Like, no, right. wrong. Yeah.
Right. The red pen that goes crazy across here.
Exactly. Like never a good sign.
So as far as like, let's maybe move on then to some commercial spaces. So probably similar and as to how you might work with residential clients, but probably some other things to consider. So what might some of those things be?
When it comes to commercial spaces, there's a couple other rules, and you're not working with as much subjectivity. It's sort of like, how do people respond in mass to these places? One thing is people hate being lost. I mean, who likes being lost, but in public spaces. And so it's really important to have some wayfinding elements. One thing is to have something like, just as you immediately enter, that orients someone, like, you are here, here's the floors, maybe it's a bird's eye map of the space. So just to kind of get your bearings. And then as we have transitions, we like to have these markers for, okay, if I have to get back to the space, I know, it was shapes and colors are probably best, or a saying like on a landing, if I'm at green level 3, and if it's just like a big 3 painted on a wall, or something that tells you like, I'm going to remember this. For some people it's going to be colors, for some others it will be shapes, but just having some kind of like wayfinding is really important in public spaces. We like those like landmarks that are really easy to remember, like I said, shapes, colors. One thing that I think is interesting in a shared space, especially if you've ever worked in like a cubicle field, we value auditory privacy over visual privacy. And so if I'm on a call, I don't mind if you can see me, but I don't want you to hear what I'm talking about. So if I'm working out of like a glass box, I'm okay to be seen. I just don't want you to hear me. And so that kind of privacy is more important to protect over visual privacy. And then in terms of like creativity and just like being like, well, I guess more calm in general to a space, like anytime we have a view to nature or some kind of nature connection, and like leans into that biophilic design, like we tend to do what we were paid to do longer, so we stay more focused at the task at hand. And then we need those like mental respite breaks to be around, like even if it's just some plant life or looking out the window periodically. So it's really important to sort of work that in if you can.
Yeah, I've noticed that biophilic design is sort of a hot topic right now, and lots of people are incorporating that. So that's great.
One area that it really needs to lean into this if they can, I know there's all kinds of restrictions with code, but hospital environments and healing spaces, because there's so much data that says we actually physically heal faster when we are around nature. We require less pain meds, we get discharged from hospitals quicker. So if there's any type of like way to create just like U-shaped hospitals with views to like a interior, corridor of plant life or something, that would be great, because we benefit so much from that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wonder if there are studies that show patients who have rooms that look over a garden or,
There are lots. Yeah.
Are there? And they tend to do better than those that
they do.
A parking lot.
Yeah, and there's good TED Talks out there about it as well. So,
any other commercial related, things that might be interesting to consider when designing a space?
Wood grain, and this is true for just all spaces. We are more calm and relaxed around visible wood grain. I think when we get into these commercial spaces, and I get it for functionality, they need to be cleanable, they need to be durable, but if you can work in wood grain into the elements, not only just visually, it softens everything and makes it more beautiful and warm. Just that element from nature being part of our day-to-day like workspaces is really important. So I think it bodes a case for maybe, not going so dark with wood, or if you do, make sure that wood grain can shine through. It's just really important to have just some of those elements. Maybe it's like a wood wall or just a wood element, or having desks made out of wood. But that does really well in commercial and in home spaces, and kind of plays off that biophilic design. One thing for the home, and I tell people this a lot, with neutrals are great and they're safe and they're beautiful, and we are very calmed in neutral environments. But when those environments are mostly all white or all beige, we actually get restless. And we get a little like fatigued and frustrated and anxious, and we can't like focus. And so it's really helpful to work in a range of neutrals. If you want to go that route, avoid going like hard on just one color and just, blanketing the space with it. So bring in some pale, wood tones, or bring in some beautiful metals, or bring in colors like even with whites. If you want to go white, there's undertones. I mean, there's so many whites you can go different directions with. So just avoid going all one direction and making sure that you're creating a layered neutral is really helpful. We are more relaxed, however, in like monochromatic spaces. So spaces that have like, let's say you want to go green, you take like a really, really deep earthy green, and then you kind of play with all the colors in that range down to like a watery celery green. Those are spaces that we feel really calm around. So if that's the goal of your office space, you may want to play with like a monochromatic, or if you've ever been to a day spa, they kind of have that soothing energy. But if your goal is like, listen, I'm like all about productivity. I need people alert. I need people like not fatigued. Go with a contrasting color story, and that would be colors opposite of the color wheel. Those are going to create a psychologically more energizing space. And so I wouldn't go full saturation in those. Like, let's say you want to go with reds and greens. I wouldn't go, bright fire engine red and, really bright green. Maybe it's like a bright red with like a really watery green.
Yeah. Do you know the psychology behind why, we tend to feel better in monochromatic spaces versus like all white spaces?
Yeah, there's, it causes white spaces. We just tense up. I think there's a formality that is, we're maybe taught like there's some reverence, or there's something with an all white space that we just don't feel like we can fully relax in and act ourselves. And it could go back to like, a lot of like spaces that are sacred are all white. And I think we act a bit more formal in those spaces. But I think as far as the monochromatic spaces, even if you're working with like a color, it just causes your eye doesn't have to jump as much, and so there's less work. So it sort of lulls you into a little bit of relaxation. Whereas the energizing color palette makes sense that it would be contrast, because your eyes kind of working a little harder to go from one color to the next. So that's another reason why gray is also nice. There's no eye fatigue around gray. So if you are in a space where you're looking at a screen a lot, that like mental break of looking up at a gray wall can be really helpful, because it's not interacting with other colors. And so it's not reverberating in a way that like causes eye fatigue.
Yeah. So would you say that then the sort of the feelings that we evoke from the spaces is usually like because our eyes are having to process, which is, we're mentally processing the space through our eyes. And so.
Yeah, there's a whole theory called the cognitive triangle, and it is essentially that thoughts, it's like, imagine a triangle, right? It's thoughts drive feelings drive behaviors. And so I think there's something to that too. Just like our thoughts are often knee jerk. So I don't even know that we're always like conscious of how we, are thought about a space. But I think those feelings really drive our behaviors in them. So I think there is something, harmonious about that. And feeling like, it could just, I think we're probably thinking like this. It could just be like an unconscious like knee-jerk reaction that we go into a space and we're immediately lulled into like relaxing, or like I need to be upright, working harder. But yeah, I think, I don't know if I answered that question well, but I think there's something there where they're all kind of chasing each other and driving the behavior. Yeah.
Are there any differences when you're designing, let's say, a hospitality space like a hotel, a restaurant? We kind of mentioned spas. How might you think about those spaces?
So I don't personally do those. It is a whole specialized skill set that I am, in awe of people that can go in and do this. But I do know the tricks that to keep in mind. So have you heard of Prospect and Refuge?
No.
If you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have seen this. I think I posted about it. So we like being under spaces that are dimly lit and protected overhead. And that would be our prospect. And this kind of dates back to these old survival skills we no longer need, but we still rely on them, especially in design. And so we like being under that space, but then we like our vantage point, and that's called your, I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? This is your refuge, right? So your refuge is where you're protected, dimly lit, protected head. But our prospect is everything that's out there. So if I had to run, if I'm in a danger situation, I want to be able to map out my path to where I'm going to run to. And we like that same scenario reflected back at us. So let's say I'm covered, I'm safe, I'm in my little cave. I can see where I'm going to run to, but I can, I see the safe spot I'm going to run to out in the distance. So I always kind of describe it like this, like crook of the hand, there's your refuge. Out here's your prospect, but I want to see where I'm going to run to if I had to run. Literally, we don't need this anymore like we used to a long time ago, but we still enjoy being in those spaces. And so if you are working in a big space that has like a wide open, like a warehouse or a big open loft, creating those moments of prospect and refuge is really important. So if maybe it's dropping a big oversized pendant over a space, and then anchoring it with a really like earthy, dark rug. So you have sort of this like womb-like space, and then all of your prospect is out there, and maybe you kind of are replicating that out in the distance. We like this in our homes too. It's kind of like why we like different ceiling heights throughout the home if we can have it. Or, think if you're out in nature, you usually don't go sit in the middle of a field. You're going to look for a tree to sit under, or where do you place your tent? It's probably against a rock with a tree, or you're not just like plopping it down in the middle of a field. So I think out in the world and in our homes, we still like those things, even though there's maybe some like dormant survival skills that we no longer need. And I think they're important to create in our living spaces as well. Another one that I like is we like having a protected back. So you probably know if you've been to a restaurant, which seat do you choose?
I would probably choose a different seat, but my husband really likes to face out. So,
oh yes,
he likes to. So I always have to choose. Not have to, but I choose to pick the one.
Okay, so not by choice. You're just being nice. You're being a nice partner. Good for you.
It's more important to him than me. So
yeah. Okay, good. Well, so he's right, and that we like having a protected back, and so we like being able to be up against a wall or having a seat that's higher where we can kind of get a lay of the land. And so those seats are the most desirable. That's why we like booth seats, and you always get bummed if you have to sit in the middle of open tables. So a protected back is important. And it's just, there's all kinds of ways you can think through this, that you maybe want to create little moments like that for, is it maybe like private calls or something, just like little rooms that people could go into, or just knowing that we like having that protected back, I think helps think about like restaurant design, or how I ate somewhere the other day that we walked in and it was just all tables sort of out in the open, and I thought, this needs some booths, or this needs some partition or something. We just feel all too exposed out here. This doesn't feel safe,
Yeah, imagine you walk through your day, like sort of analyzing the design and kind of thinking about like, oh, maybe they could have done this a little bit differently, or...
No, it's like, it's a sickness.
Well, I was curious because I recently had the pleasure, I guess, of going to a conference in Vegas, and I was thinking about how interesting it was, the way that the casinos are sort of laid out, and the hotels and all the underground tunnels that connect, all of the hotels, and just thinking about how much they have to think about the psychology around that design when they're trying to kind of like encourage people to stay a little longer at the slot machines. And so just curious what your thoughts were about that.
That's back to, there's probably so many studies out there on this exact topic. In fact, I'm sure there are, because that's their whole business, right? But people that don't have access to like our views of nature, we don't orient ourselves. So our circadian rhythms are driven by sunlight. So that's how well we sleep. Oh, I guess we got a thumbs up there. Sorry. Yay. How well we sleep, how well we fall asleep, how well we feel regulated in the day is all based on how like our exposure to sunlight. And so there are studies that say if you are struggling with insomnia to spend some time in nature, and it helps reset your circadian rhythm. And so when you deprive people of that, they lose orientation to the world. So they lose orientation of time and space, and we lose track of how long we've been in a building and doing something. So the sun is a great marker of, think about when you were a kid, it was like, okay, but I want you home before the sun comes down. And you knew that was like the wind down. That was the time. And we just start to feel it, whether we're looking at a clock or not. You feel the day change and you feel like it's got to be about time to wrap up. But when you pluck that element out of our psyche and we don't have that as our reference point, we do things a lot longer. We snack more, we eat more, we gamble more, we stay in buildings and shop longer. So there's definitely some psychology there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was there for about 3 days, and after about a day and a half, I realized that I hadn't gone outside, and I was like, I have to get outside. I felt very strange. I felt like the sun didn't actually set or come up. It was just a very odd feeling.
I've wondered that. I've traveled to Alaska before, and the time I was there, I was traveling when it was all sunny. So I think maybe that was like summertime. I can't remember, but it was so disorienting to not have that marker of like end of day and when, okay, it's getting dinner time. And I'm like, I think I'm hungry, but is it time? Like it was very disorienting to be there. And I felt like the animals acted different. I felt like it just, the birds and the sky seemed different. Everything felt like it was just on a different program than what I was used to. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, we're such creatures of habit, and the sunrise and the sunset, those are things we expect to happen daily. So it is weird when it doesn't happen.
I know, it's literal ancestral, like the guiding force.
Yeah, interesting.
I think it's interesting to think through designing when it comes to the five senses. And I feel like one of the our senses that we often overlook as like designers is scent. It's not one that we work with a lot, right? We're visual, we're tactile, you're touching things, maybe taste too. But you can like scentscape a place, whether this is your home or your retail space, to get sort of a desired behavior. I think there was a study, like it was music. Was it French music? Anyway, playing French music in a wine store, like their sales of French wine increased, or if you have a space, smell like the beach, people tend to buy beachy related things. So our scent is most closely tied to our memory. Your scent, where it gets processed in the brain, is actually the same place that you store memories. And so as it's moving up to the brain, it kind of bumps the amygdala and the hippocampus, and those are where memories get stored and encoded in the brain. And so that's why if you smell something, you can immediately have like I remember that time in my life, or I remember that junior high boyfriend, or whatever it is that takes you back to that time, because they're just so closely connected in how they get processed. And so I think thinking about, and this is another one that can be really personal. So what kind of moods do you want to evoke in this space? And are there any scents that really make sense for you to have in that space based on your history? We also, back to the five senses a bit, when one or more of our five senses get activated, when we are experiencing a space, it becomes ingrained and more memorable for us. So I think this is kind of a challenge to people who want to create more of an experience, whether this is like people who have a secondary property that they're renting out and maybe they want to create an experience for their guest, or maybe this is a commercial space. If you can tap into one or more of those five senses, better yet, all five, that becomes a more ideally positive ingrained memory for people. I have an example of when I was traveling a long time ago. I went to, I think it's called Kutna Hora. It's in Prague, in Czechoslovakia, but it was called the Bone Church. And believe it was a monk, and there was a plague, and he'd take all these bones of everyone in the town because he didn't know what to do with people were dropping off bodies. And so he took all these bones and created a huge like cathedral and a church space. When I visited that, I mean, I like the feel of the handrail. It was like femurs, right? It was like touching femurs walking down, and there was a candelabra of every bone in the human body. And so it was like the sheer scale of that was like sight, the touch. There was a, kind of a smell to it because it was really old, and the sounds, it was kind of echoey. I mean, I will remember that forever just because it was beautiful. It was like, sad and beautiful at the same time, but it was, all of those my 5 senses got activated, and I just think back and I can immediately picture myself there. And I think it goes back to that principle of like activating all the 5 senses if you can.
That church sounds fascinating.
You should look it up. It's crazy. Yeah. It's really impressive.
Yeah. I mean, even just, and I'm thinking back in my history of, I used to work at Crabtree and Evelyn when I was in, high school, and everything in there was just like your senses were just on fire. There was like the smells and the music and everything. And I like, it really sticks with me, that feeling. I can remember being in that space, and, there were, just working with people. But anyway, it's interesting how you're like, all of your senses get sort of heightened when you're in a space like that.
Yeah. And it can be in the negative direction too. If you'll recall, that's why scents or sounds can be so triggering for people if they've experienced some kind of a trauma in a space, and then just being in that space, just the texture of something can like set them back into that quickly. Yeah.
Well, I find all of this so fascinating, and apparently you do too. So
I can.
So what are you working on anything at the moment? Do you have any projects that you're working on where you're using this at the moment, using these skills?
Right now, I'm working on mostly residential spaces. I'm very excited about one project we have that is a yoga studio, and I'm going to try to employ some of those techniques. I don't think I mentioned it, but like curves are a really big one for soothing spaces too. We rate them as being more quiet and more serene when curved objects are part of a space, or curved architecture. So I'm really excited to maybe bring some of those in and some of the biophilic principles into that project. Just mostly residential, getting to know the clients, and then employing some of these things as they feel appropriate. And I think like educating as I go, whether it's like this overt thing, I'm using design psychology for this. Sometimes it's just educating, like, oh, what do you think about this? Because this leads to this. And then I'm just doing a lot of lectures around town. I've been talking with a lot of real estate agents, just how they can kind of just educating them on design psychology. I think, they're in homes so much. So I'm really excited about partnering with agents and, just educating everyone. Take care.
Yeah. And so I know you do have a course that you offer, and is that pretty much available to anyone, or do you find you're mostly working with designers?
No, it's actually mostly not designers. It's mostly people interested in either design or psychology or just the field in general or curious. And I'm doing that. I need to schedule this. My next one will probably be late June. I'm trying to do them once a month. I have a toddler, so, just the best laid plans don't always shake out that way. But, and I'm just hosting like a Zoom calls. It's like an hour and a half mini course where I take my 16-week college course and just condense it into an hour and a half of lecture. And, that's just pay, sign up. I send you the link and anyone can join. And that's on my website.
Wow, that sounds really cool. Well, great. Well, if people wanted to follow you or see what you're up to, where is the best place to find you?
Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at social media. Let me think. I think my Instagram is AKD, I want to say _design psychology. No, Amber Dunford Design Psychology, sorry, is my Instagram handle. And then I have a website, amberdunforddesigns.com. It'll link to all that. So whatever socials anyone is into, you can probably find me through there.
Yeah, and on LinkedIn. You're
LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn.
Yes, I am. So brought us together.
Well, great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today. This was really interesting and fun. Thank you.
Yeah, fun for me too. Thank you so much.